A desert planet with twin suns.
Why do I sense we've picked up another pathetic life form?
Use my knowledge. Much to learn. You still have.
What is up, guys? Welcome back to Twin Sun Talks. I'm your host, Jonah Liu. Thank you so much for listening. And I'm super excited for our episode today because in the next two episodes, I'm going to be taking y'all on my roadmap through the Clone Wars. So the Clone Wars, for those of you who don't know, is an animated Star Wars TV show. It is one of the best forms of content that I think the franchise has. And essentially what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be telling y'all what are the necessary episodes to watch and which ones aren't. Just so it kind of breaks down the show a bit easier because it's a full 7 seasons. So it is a bit of a daunting prospect to tackle just all together. But I'm hoping that my roadmap is going to help streamline that process a little bit and get you through it a little bit faster and only hit the most important parts of it. So without further ado, let's dive into ARC Trooper Training Clone Wars Edition.
Gentlemen, who wants to be an ARC Trooper? I do, sir!
Alrighty, let's just dive right into this. So there are going to be 3 tiers of episode that I'm going to have in this. There's going to be optional, heavily suggested, and mandatory. I'm not even going to mention the episodes that you shouldn't watch. But yeah, so optional is like something like, this has something that could be useful, but if you don't hear it, it's not going to be detrimental to your understanding or enjoyment of the rest of the show. And then heavily suggested is like, this is a super awesome episode, or it has a super interesting character. But once again, it's not super important, it's just a really good episode. And then mandatory is you gotta watch it. You gotta watch it. There's a character in here that's super important to the rest of the show, or it's just too important to the central plot line. Something like that. You gotta watch it. So, with that being said, I'm gonna start with the Clone Wars movie, which came out first, back in 2008. I mark this as optional. It introduces Ahsoka Tano and Captain Rex. Those are the main things that are super important within it, but it kind of sets the tone, but it's not indicative of the rest of the show at all. But it's solid, I would say. Optional, but not required by any means. So, with that said, let's go into Season 1. So, Episode 1 of Season 1, Ambush. This is optional. It sets the tone. You get to spend some time with Ventress, Dooku's assassin, and you get to see Yoda kick some butt, and you also get introduced to the uniqueness of the clones within the clone army. It's cool. It's not necessarily by any means. The next 3 episodes, episodes 2 through 4, are the Malevolent Arc, Rising Malevolence, Shadow of Malevolence, and Destroy Malevolence. These are optional. You get to meet Plo Koon. It is pretty cool. You're still kind of getting oriented to the series. It's cool, but not necessary. The thing with these first 2 seasons is that it is still very much a kid's show. This show grows up with its audience. So what I'm very wary of is people getting bored because they think that it's too much of a kid's show. I don't think that these episodes are boring per se. I just think that there is better stuff down the line. And so I don't want to discourage y'all from watching these, but I also don't want to say it's the end-all be-all if you do not watch them. Alrighty, the next one, Episode 5, Rookies, is mandatory. You have to watch this episode. It introduces some very important characters down the line. You get to spend some time with Captain Rex, Commander Cody, and once again, you get to see the clones more as individuals rather than just copy-paste replicas of each other. So you have to watch this episode. It's a really cool episode, and I think that y'all will enjoy it. Now we're going to skip a few. We're going to go to Episode 10, and the Lair of Grievous. This is optional, but you get to spend some time with Grievous, which is always a cool time. He's an awesome character. You get to meet Kit Fisto, spend a bit more time with him. You don't get to see him too much in the movies. I think it's a really cool episode. It's not necessary, but it's definitely a cool time. The next 2 episodes are Dooku capturing the Gungan General. These are episodes 11 and 12 of Season 1. They're optional. They introduce a character named Hondo Onaka, who's pretty He's a pretty important recurring character, and he's super entertaining. He's pretty funny. And you get a little more in-depth time with Dooku, which is interesting because I think that he was done a great disservice in the movies, and I think the Clone Wars does a great job of adding some depth to his character. But be wary of Jar Jar in the second episode. This is one thing that I'm always terrified of whenever I suggest watching the Clone Wars to people, is that they're going to get turned off by all of the Jar Jar content, because it is there, but be wary of that in the second episode. But I still think that these are good episodes. They're just optional. Okay, so then we skip down to episodes 119, season 1, so episodes 19 through 21. These are Storm over Ryloth, Innocence of Ryloth, and Liberty on Ryloth. They get progressively better as they go. I would say that these are heavily suggested just because this is where the show kind of starts to pick up. It's getting its foothold a little better. They're not necessary, but they're cool. You get some cool development, character development for Ahsoka in the first episode. You get to meet Waxer and Boyle, two really cool clone troopers, in the second episode, and then you get some time with Mace Windu. So of course I'm going to recommend any episode with Mace, and you get to meet Cham Syndulla, which is a really cool freedom fighter on Ryloth, in the third episode of that 3-episode arc. So I would say, cool episode, not fully necessary, but I would definitely recommend watching it. Then we get to the last episode of the season, which is episode 22, Hostage Crisis. This episode is mandatory. You meet a very important character named Cad Bane. And that's all I'm going to say. It ties into the Clone Wars movie a bit. It's a cool time. I would recommend it. You need to watch it. Cad Bane is a pretty important recurring character, and I don't want y'all to be confused whenever he shows up down the line. Alrighty, that wraps up Season 1. On to Season 2 now. So, Season 2, the first 3 episodes. I'm gonna start referring to these as 201, 202. So the 2 at the very beginning just refers to it being Season 2. There aren't actually 201 episodes. So, episode 201 through 203, which is the Holocron arc. This continues to follow Cad Bane, who is the character that I said was very important in the last episode of Season 1. You get introduced to holocrons, which are a fairly important piece of Jedi lore. You get some interesting development for Ahsoka as a character, who is kind of the main character of this show. So it's pretty important to get to know her well. There's not too much else going on with these episodes. I marked them as optional. I'd say they fall somewhere between optional and heavily suggested. I find them mildly boring since I've watched the rest of the show, but I think that if you're still fresh on it, you'll really enjoy them. Then we skip down to episodes 205 to 206, which are Landing at Point Rain and Weapons Factory. These are taking place during the second invasion of Geonosis, which has some cool callbacks to episode 2, the movies, not the show. And you get to you spend some time with Ki-Adi-Mundi. It's, in my opinion, the first bout of really, really good action. In the second episode, 206, you get introduced to Barriss Offee, and you once again get very good character development for Ahsoka in that episode. The next 2 episodes, those are mandatory, by the way, if I didn't say that already. Landing at Point Rain and Weapons Factory are mandatory. The next 2 episodes are still taking place during the Geonosian invasion. They're episodes 207, 208, Legacy of Terror, and Brain Invaders. These 2 episodes freaked me out as a kid. I marked them as optional. If you're into horror stuff, it is very tame. I've since realized as an adult, or a mild adult, it's mild horror stuff, but it's as close as Clone Wars gets to something like a zombie movie. So if you're into that kind of thing, I would say go for it. If you're not, they're not necessary at all. The next 2 episodes, 209 and 210, Grievous Intrigue and The Deserter. These are mandatory. They're awesome episodes. You get some awesome action. You get some awesome info about clones, and I love, these are some of my most rewatched episodes. Heavily recommend watch them, please. Episode 212, The Mandalore Plot. It is an introduction to the Mandalorians, the New Age Mandalorians. It is an absolutely awesome time. This is mandatory, once again. And I would say, yeah, no, there's no reason to not watch it. You meet Death Watch. What more could you want? Watch it, please. The next two episodes, 213 and 214, Voyage of Temptation and The Duchess of Mandalore, are not necessary, but if you're interested in Mandalorians, I would definitely recommend watching them. They're optional because they're not super, super important, but if you want some more lore about Mandalorians, definitely watch them. The next episodes I have down are 216 and 217, Cat and Mouse and Bounty Hunters. These aren't related, but they're just back to back, so I put them next to each other. You meet some cool characters like Admiral Trench and a bounty hunter named Embo. They're not necessary, so this is definitely an optional set of episodes, but I would say go for it. If you want to meet some cool characters, go for it. The next two episodes, the Zilla Beast arc, 218 and 219. These are optional. It's kind of a Godzilla style episode arc. Mace Windu is in it, so obviously I'm going to at least recommend it. They're not optional, but I think that they're pretty cool. And then to round out the season, with episodes 220 through 222, we get Boba Fett's arc. So this is following Boba Fett as a young boy trying to get his vengeance against Mace Windu. I heavily recommend these. They're not mandatory, but it is heavily recommended because you get cool insight into young Boba and his bounty hunting posse. And then you get some time with Mace Windu, so of course I'm going to recommend it once again. It's a trend that y'all will become very familiar with. And so, with that said, that rounds out Season 2 for me. And don't worry, I'm going to post this roadmap on my Instagram, so y'all don't have to remember all this. This is just a little more in-depth about why you should watch some of these episodes, but I will post the roadmap on my Instagram. Don't you worry. Alrighty, and now we're on to Season 3. This is where it starts to pick up a little bit, guys. This is when it finds its stride, and I think that the really, really good content starts flowing in a lot more consistently. So, the first two first two episodes are mandatory. This is episodes 301 and 302. Clone Cadets and ARC Troopers, the namesake of the segment. You get some awesome time with the clones. They tie back to episode 5 of season 1, and you get super cool action and character development. All around great time. Definitely watch these. You have to. You don't have a choice. I will find you if you do not watch these episodes. Not really. Don't call the police. Episode 303, Supply Lines. Optional. It has a very cool character that is introduced named Amagandai, which might be a spoiler for this episode, but that's his name, I promise. It is completely unnecessary, but it is awesome. But there is also Jar Jar. Jar Jar is the one drawback from this episode, but it is still really cool. So be wary of Jar Jar, but it's a cool episode, and it's optional. Episodes 304 and 305, Corruption and the Academy. So these episodes are, I don't want to say boring, but there's cooler stuff out there. These are optional. You get some more insight into the new Mandalorians, and you get a pretty interesting storyline with one of the higher-ups within the Mandalorians that is pretty important down the line, but you're not gonna be too confused over what's happening because they do a pretty good job with exposition later. But it's optional. But if you're interested in the Mandalorians, go ahead and watch that. The next episode I have down is 309, The Hunt for Zero. This is heavily suggested because you get introduced to Quinlan Voss. He's really the only reason. You get some time with Cad Bane, which is pretty cool, but it is a weird storyline. Like, I kind of forget how weird it is until I watch it, but I mean, it happens. So that's heavily suggested, not mandatory. 310, heroes on both sides. You meet Lux Bonteri. This is optional. He's a pretty important character later, but that's the only reason that I would say watch it. You get some kind of cool nuance between, like, seeing how there can be friends on both sides of the war between the Separatists and the Republicans, but, not the Republicans, the Republic. But, it's only really important because Lux is in it. Episode 312 through 314. This is mandatory. This is the Ventress Sauvage Opress arc. You get fantastic character development for Ventress. Up until this point, she was just kind of an evil assassin, and you actually get some depth for her in this episode, or this set of episodes. You get introduced to Sauvage and introduced to the Night Sisters. You have to watch this once again. This is mandatory. This is very important stuff. Episodes 315 to 17. Oh, y'all are in the good stuff now. This is the Mortis arc. An absolutely bizarre but incredible story. Some of the best Clone Wars content, in my opinion. It took me a couple watches to fully appreciate it. It is not like anything that you have seen from Clone Wars up until this point. And it's fantastic. That's mandatory. And would you look at that? Basically, the rest of the season is mandatory. So episodes 318 to 320 is the Citadel arc. This is one of my favorite arcs in all of Clone Wars. You get to see Obi-Wan, Anakin, and company kind of just do their thing in a covert rescue operation. There's very little better in the Clone Wars, in my opinion. It is absolutely fantastic. Definitely watch it. And then the last two episodes of the season, which are 321 and 322, Padawan Lost and Wookiee Hunt. Some of the best character development for Ahsoka in the entire show. You meet Chewbacca, which is fantastic. And I think that for whatever reason, the animation in this episode is absolutely stunning. And it's breathtaking. It's absolutely fantastic. And it's mandatory. You have to watch this one. So congratulations. You get to enjoy it as well. So that's all that I have today for these. I'm only doing the first 3 seasons in this one because I don't want this episode to be too long. So I'll do episodes 4 through 7 in the next episode. But before I go, I gotta hit you with a little bit more. So what I'm gonna be talking at y'all about today is just a very brief explanation of what ARC Troopers are. I realized that I never gave an explanation for the namesake of the previous segment. So essentially, ARC Troopers are Advanced Recon Commandos, ARC, and they are distinguished for excellence in battle among the ranks of the Grand Army of the Republic, and they are capable of more independent thought than their other clone peers, and are regarded as some of the most skilled fighters in the Grand Army of the Republic. They were stationed on Kamino and helped with the training of new generations, and they were also deployed to help with very important covert operations. And yeah, that's about it. I don't have much. There's a lot more that could be said, but for the sake of this segment, it's supposed to just be a short little tidbit. That's all for today's episode. Thank y'all so much for listening. Go ahead and follow us on Instagram if y'all want a hard copy of this list. I'm going to be posting that after the next episode where I go over seasons 4 through 7. Our Instagram is at Twin Sun Talks, one word. And if y'all want to listen to us on YouTube, which is really just this podcast, but on YouTube, just search up Twin Sun Talks podcast. And go ahead and like and subscribe up there. Any support is very much appreciated. And thank y'all so much for listening again. You've taken your first steps into a larger world, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye, friends.